Well, hello and welcome to this extra special session of ExecuNet Masterclass. As always, I'm your host, Tony Vlahos. Today's topic of conversation is the switch, how to go from working a corporate job for a paycheck to working for yourself as an entrepreneur. And with me today is a man who has done it. He will share with you how he did it while keeping his day job and all that he's learned along the way of his career journey. My hope is that in the next hour or so, you will be educated and inspired to take full control of your career destiny as well. And I believe you'll walk away with that from our conversation today. It's all part of our commitment here at ExecuNet to bring you trusted advice you can count on to guide the next step in your career. So, real quick, the format for today's session. First, you should have received a short slide deck. Many of you are nodding. Yes, I can tell. That's great. If you have not, fear not. You can get the slides in PDF straight from the screen in front of you. Just look under the handout section on your right. And if you have any trouble finding it, of course, chat to us and my amazing colleague Kim will help you out. Second, this will be an advice-filled Q&A session. There will be questions that I'm asking my guests, and of course, you may also chat in your questions, and I'll do my best to include them in our conversation. Lastly, very important, please complete your evaluation form before you go. Tell us how we did. I know that my two guests both value your feedback, and Kim and I do too. It really does help us serve you better. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about the two gentlemen virtually seated right next to me. First, we have Mike Furness. Mike has a successful and enjoyable corporate career. In fact, 30 plus year career in the telecommunications industry, including 20 years as an operations executive. Facing 3 job eliminations in 10 years due to corporate mergers made Mike think about exploring something different. And he explored franchising in 2017 while continuing to search for his next corporate gig. And then in the middle of 2017, he invested in a boutique fitness concept with the right to build 3 studios. And I'll save the rest of the story for our conversation with Mike, but things are going really well there. So let me also introduce our other guest today. His name should not be a surprise to many of you who are ExecuNet members. It's Pete Gilfillan. Pete is a nationally recognized franchise consultant. He's the international best-selling author of the book Hire Yourself. Pete has a proven track record of changing people's lives, simply put. In fact, over the years, he has helped hundreds of ExecuNet members explore franchise ownership and successfully reset their career. If you've ever dreamed of being your own boss, you'll be extra glad you tuned in today to learn both from Mike and from Pete how to move forward from where you are to where you want to go next. You'll find he's a great educator and consultant and actually a really nice guy as well. So with that, welcome two nice guys, Pete and Mike. How are you both doing today?
Doing very well, Tony. Thank you for having me.
Well, terrific. Pete, hello to you too.
Yes, it's great to be here. Thank you, Tony.
Awesome. So, Mike, we've organized the questions today into a few main categories. We're going to start with a conversation about life before franchise ownership and entrepreneurship. We'll move into and through those moments of, I'll say, self-realization, the tipping point where I'm sure many executives spend a lot of time and possibly agonizing nights thinking through, okay, what do I do from here? Because I know I don't want to keep just doing what I'm doing. Then we'll cover the nuts and bolts of making that switch, and we'll just talk loosely at the end about ways that you can stay successful in such a corporate or career path. So sound good to you, Mike? Ready to go?
Sounds great.
All right. So let's start at the beginning. Not birth, but close enough, right? Corporate life. So tell us about this. You're a product of corporate professional upbringing. Tell us a bit more about the different companies you've worked for, Mike.
So, Tony, I started in the telecom industry after a stint in the military and some further education, and found an opportunity as a technician working on a telecom network, servicing the who's who of telecom back in the late mid 80s, and from there moved into management quickly. we continue to serve again the large providers of telecom industry, and grew into small medium business type customers.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, that company, through growth and acquisitions, I found an opportunity to leave the company, and joined another company, again doing small to medium business companies service, and moved there as an executive, and then again through another merger, job cancellation, joined a company, some folks I'd worked with previously, and built another company up, and through its merger, again another worked myself out of a job, another job elimination.
Mm-hmm.
But in all cases, servicing telecom carriers primarily, the Verizons, the MCIs, the AT&Ts, names that are very familiar with most everybody on the call.
Got it. So could you sum up for us, Mike, what have you enjoyed the most about corporate life? And on the flip side, well, we all have our own personal list, but what does yours look like? What did you not like about it so much, or don't like about it so much?
Well, I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about my time at corporate America, and continue to enjoy, is the camaraderie. The people you work with, from an operations perspective, you periodically go through battles, and just you're all in it together. You work through it, you come out on the other side, and you can then enjoy that, much like a team wins a championship or some big event. That to me is kind of the thing that just kept me going and kept me really enjoyed with that line of work. And that's where my passion is at, to be honest. Certainly we perceived that we had minimal risk, right? If you do a good job, you got a paycheck, life will work out for itself. And certainly opportunities for advancement are certainly welcomed and enjoyed in corporate America. When I look at what I didn't like, and I would, we've all come across those individuals that we've worked with that poor management actions, unethical behaviors by some in some key positions, certainly untrustworthy folks, and the politics that goes on in those environments. So, those are things that you have to tolerate in those organizations, whether you like them or not. They're going to happen.
Sure. And it seems that in many cases, those very same individuals also claim the lion's share of the reward. And I would bet that any of us that are in corporate life and thinking about our own list of things we don't like, not getting the full share of that reward and having as great an influence over, excuse me, what happens in corporate life probably would land on most lists. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes.
Okay, awesome. So I want to fast forward a little bit to what we've termed the tipping point. Was there a moment, Mike, in your corporate career when you knew it was time to start exploring, doing something in addition to, maybe not instead of? I'm wondering if you could recall that moment and play it forward for us. And along the way, feel free to tell us emotionally where you were with that, because it's not just a rational decision for many of us, it's action-packed with emotions as well. Walk us through that moment for you, please.
Sure. So if you just back up a few years, about 2016, I was a very happy individual. I was working my tail off, like I'm sure most people on this call have done. Had great success at work, had good income, well regarded by my peers, the board of directors, key customers. Life was good. We had challenges, but we worked through those, and the outcomes were very positive. But there was that little guy on my shoulder just kept whispering things into my ear about, hey, over the last 10 years, you found an opportunity to look for a new job 3 times. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. How long will this ride that you're on right now last? Will it last until you're ready to retire? And that was gnawing at me. And then when I got the tap on the shoulder and said, hey, the merger's done. Thank you for accomplishing all these great things and getting things pulled together quickly. And here's your exit papers. I, like everybody else, dove into rewriting my resume, attended a number of webinars to how to get an interview again in the current day. And one of those um, webinars that I attended was an ExecuNet webinar that Pete was on, and telling you to hire yourself.
Mhm.
I did not enter that as a desire to do that, but that was kind of the decision point on my part, is to begin to look at this opportunity.
Mhm. So until that moment, had you really ever seriously considered the entrepreneurial path? Was it, for some of us, it's sort of the thing we always dream about, like, oh, I'll put in X number of years, but I've got this vision and ideally a strategy for exiting, et cetera. Was that you, or were you just at a point where you were, I'll say, dissatisfied enough and wanting more enough to at least just be curious enough about it? How would you characterize your mindset at that moment?
I would say that I never had the desire to go into business for myself.
Hmm.
That was just not something that was in my bucket of things to go do. Didn't feel that I would be successful. Um, but I also knew, as I continued to age, that my likelihood to find a job, have to find another job, the chances of that continued to increase. So I was looking for ways to reduce my risk by spreading where I earned my income from.
Right. Interesting. I want to bring in Pete's voice a bit. Pete, we've talked to so many corporate executives who were in that tipping point moment. And if I remember correctly, what we often hear from our ExecuNet members includes what Mike just said, along with things like taking control of my destiny, uh, building something for myself, making a difference, diversifying, as Mike pointed out, assets and income. Tell me, Pete, in your own words, what you were picking up on from Mike, but also how representative that is of the hundreds of people you've worked with over the years. Give us your view of this, please.
Yeah, so Mike was kind of typical, right? He sat through one of our ExecuNet webinars and we talked about franchising. He got a good education of that, and he raised his hand. He said, "Listen, Pete, I want to at least talk to you." And we started the process. And one of the important things that I always ask people is, why would you consider investing in a franchise? And for Mike, it was things like, "Hey, listen, I just want to create that career and income security or stability, and I want to be engaged. I'm not ready to retire." And I guess retirement's really kind of changed now, right? Retirement's not ceasing to work like it's defined, but more so doing something I enjoy and having income that goes into my retirement so that I don't outlive my assets. And so Mike really wanted to come with this idea of creating a bridge to retirement, setting up an opportunity for himself while also having the ability to do a corporate job. And
Mhm.
so we see many people that as they get thrown into career transition or they're thinking about setting up their future, they want to explore this idea of keeping an income while starting a business on the side, because then they have got great options. And so I see a lot of executives now do what's called a semi-absentee, executive semi-absentee, where they keep their corporate job, they have another business, and they start a franchise on the side. And so
Mhm.
that's a big trend that we're seeing today.
Awesome. It's good to know that. And we'll touch on it, I'm sure, as we lead into the next section of our conversation. But I want to dial back for a moment because, Mike, one of the, I'll say, unusual things about you is that you invested in your business prior to fully immersing yourself in franchise ownership. Is that, do I have that right? And tell me about your decision making there and how you did that.
Well, I invested in the franchise before I went back to work,
Okay, got
um,
it.
and then soon after I got my first studio open, matter of fact, within a week or two of the grand opening, I was back at work and have been since then.
Okay. So let's get into the, I'll call it the switching part of this, because we've covered, I know it's brief, guys, but we've covered, in a nutshell, the state of Mike when he was just that corporate executive, and then we've covered the tipping point and then sort of constructed what that looked like for Mike. The switch, I want to get into some level of detail for our audience to really understand the reality of making this kind of change for themselves potentially. So first off, Mike, why a franchise business versus, I don't know, creating your own business concept or buying an existing business? What was it about franchise ownership that, as you began to stare at entrepreneurship, appealed to you the most?
Well, in working with Pete, he asked me some questions that I had to take some time to really think through about myself, my strengths and weaknesses. Which, in corporate America, we all have time to realize your strengths and weaknesses. But what's your strengths, your weaknesses, your desires, your goals? I had to think about that on a much deeper level than I ever had to on a corporate level perspective, because depending upon that outcome, then that had a level of risk with my own personal money, not the corporation's money. So as I worked down through that, I realized where areas that I really was not prepared to deal with. I'm not a salesperson. I don't have any background in marketing. And if you can't sell something and if you can't market something, you're going to really struggle in starting up a new business. Where in a franchise concept, there's a pre-built model that if you do this and do that, and you follow the plan, you should be successful. Well, from an operations perspective, I'm used to following the recipe. I've written some of the recipes, but I'm used to following that and getting that out there and making that done. I was good at leading people. So if I hired the right people who came from a sales background, and they followed the script of how to sell, well, they already experienced at that, now follow the model. I can coach them through that, and then we can be successful. So I felt like franchising was the best fit for me because it solved the areas that I knew I was not prepared to deal with.
Right. So in a sense, it addressed your personal risk, which is so important. So remind everyone who might have missed it earlier, Mike, what type of business did you invest in?
I invested in a boutique fitness concept. So I have
Great.
the rights to 3 studios and have 2 of them open currently.
Okay, awesome. And tell us, please, what process you use to find the business that you ultimately invested in. And Pete, if you want to weigh in here and help Mike out, because I know at some point you probably work together on this, and that's part of what Pete does so well. So Mike, kick it off and tell us how you found it, how you were thinking through it, and how you finally ended up selecting it.
Certainly. So as Pete mentioned earlier, I attended one of these webinars with ExecuNet from Pete, and then I reached out to him afterwards and said, "Hey, let's talk some more. I'm not sure I want to go down this road. I'm really not comfortable with this, but let's talk. I want to learn. I want to gather more information." And through a series of conversations back and forth, I finally said, "Okay, Pete, here's what if we can find something that fits these criteria, see what you can go find and help me do that." And so Pete brought me some concepts to review.
Okay.
And I think, from my standpoint, Tony, what I use is a very specific process with this idea that I want to spend time having Mike fill out a very simple questionnaire, looking for key characteristics and looking for what he wants to accomplish. And then I spent basically 90 minutes doing a consultation call with him with this idea as I asked him questions and learned about what he was looking for, learning about his strengths, his weaknesses from that standpoint. And I took all that stuff and kind of created a model and used that to go research franchises. And what Mike didn't tell you is that I came back with 3 franchise companies, all very different companies, some service-based, some facility-based, like the boutique fitness that he did. But the idea is that we were really looking to try to get a good understanding of what he's looking for, what he wanted to accomplish, and then match it up with good, solid, proven franchises through a very systematic process over a period of time.
That sounds like it, and certainly to be able to stare at a few choices is always a good thing, right? So on the topic of choices. Of course, there are different ways to be a franchise business owner. Pete and Mike, of course, describe for our audience what this semi-absentee franchise business ownership model looks like. And I suspect many of our friends listening in are obviously in corporate life and are wondering how to keep the risks down and keep the income flow happening. And semi-absenteeism might be something that they would want to understand more about. So help us understand it.
Certainly. So, as I was going through my evaluation, I think there's a key concept here that needs that I learned from talking to some other owners, and that was if they had a single studio and life happened with the people they had running the studio, then they had to run in there and cover things. And I did not want to do that. I wanted, as I mentioned earlier, my passion is still in the telecom industry. While I felt a connection with this fitness concept, it's not the passion. It's not the thing that really gets me going. And so I wanted multiple locations within the same geographic area. So as vacations, employee turnover, growth, whatever happens, I can then draw upon the staff from the other studios to do that. So so that took away again the risk from a staffing perspective that you have if you've got a single location approach. I staff each location with a general manager. I empower them to make all the day-to-day decisions that need to be made. So if a customer comes in with a particular issue, they're empowered to make the decision and make it right. And early on, as they come on board, we spend a lot of time talking through different things, so they know how I think and how we want to run that. And then they're empowered to go do those things. And then once a week, we talk through those in case we need to do any minor course corrections. But they run the day-to-day. They are the face of the studio. They know that from the interview process on, that's their house to run and do. They just need to follow the guidelines from a franchise that the franchise company provides to us, and then all I have to worry about is, are they executing on the numbers, and if not, provide adjustments and counsel to help make improvements there.
Right. I want to start to weave in some of the questions that are being chatted in by our listeners, and this will be no surprise to Pete. The question of funding your business has come up, and everyone's picked up on the fact that Mike invested while he was moving back into corporate life. Mike, how did you fund your business? Was it through a loan? Did you tap home equity? Help us out. Help us see how you did this.
Sure. I did what's called a ROBS account initially, which basically established my business using retirement funds, and it's not taxed. And then I did that initially to get the business started and the first studio built, and then the second studio I then went and did an SBA loan.
Okay.
Along with some additional personal investment.
Pete, do you want to detail for us a bit what that really means?
Yeah, so today we're very fortunate to have many different mechanisms that you can leverage to fund a business. And so one of the things that I do is I connect them with people that's what they specialize in, is helping people figure out how to best leverage your capital. And so you certainly can use your retirement dollars. It's the ROBS program. What you're basically doing is creating your own retirement account, and your retirement account is investing in your business. You are actually an employee of your retirement account. So you see a lot of people doing that. SBA funds are pretty much available today, and so that is a great mechanisms to leverage financing. And then other people are tapping home equity because it's still a low cost way to fund your business. So it's really about kind of deciding which is the best mix for you. But in all cases, you have to have some capital available to invest in a business, but there are many different ways in which you can fund a franchise business.
Right. And I want to return to a sister question that's been chatted in around, okay, we get the investment. How long before you start to see a return? I want to hold that one until we get into that a little later on. But Pete, staying with you, I've got a couple of other questions I'm going to coalesce into one and ask you. we've got listeners who are contemplating franchise ownership alongside owning a existing business. Can you, and I think Mike picked up on this a bit earlier, thank you, but could you, Pete, from your perspective, address that question of, well, why would you choose a franchise ownership over buying an existing business?
Well, I think they both have their pros and cons. When you're buying an existing business, you have a certain amount of kind of cash flow in theory from that standpoint, and you can buy a resale franchise, right? So they two kind of mix together. But I think what I experienced when I was looking for existing businesses, it's really hard to find a good one. A lot of times there's tails to it, there's skeletons and stuff like that. And so I had a really hard time, and I spent a fair amount of time looking for existing businesses. The nice thing about a franchise is you're in it with somebody that can kind of help you. So if you buy an existing business, that it's handed off to you and it's kind of yours. When you invest in a franchise, you go through the training. Even if it's a resale, you go through the training. You still have all that support from the franchisor, the systems, the processes, procedures, the training, all that good stuff, and you have the brand. And so it's a great way to do that, in addition to all the other franchisees that are a resource. And so as you look at it up front, buying an existing business, it seems to be more attractive. But when you really get into looking at a franchise, it's attractive from the standpoint of all the support and guidance and everything else associated with it.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, you touched on this earlier. You're not a marketing guy, and you claim you're not a good salesperson, and that's fair. A lot of us aren't. And yet, with the help, I suspect, of the franchise of the parent company, you were able to move forward and accomplish these things, correct?
Absolutely, Tony. So from a marketing perspective, they had a plan laid right out. You
Mm-hmm.
contact this company. We've got they already know the plan. You execute the payment. You give them a little bit of money, and this happens. And there was 3 different vendors that I worked with that did different activities within the marketing realm as we were going from soft open into grand open, and then I continue to work with those as we go through. But now that I'm open at those locations, I can choose how much I spend. I can ramp it up. I can scale it back depending upon the particular needs of the studio. But a lot of guidance from a marketing perspective from the franchisor. From a
Mm-hmm.
sales perspective, from the day the lease was signed, immediately there was a weekly call scheduled with, and it was more of one-on-one call with an individual who was designed to help me get the sales going, how to pre-sell memberships, how to get and manage yourself right on through the sales. And once you became open, then you're handed off to somebody else that has the expertise. But they're always right there working with you to make sure you know how to deal with it, how to deal with certain situations. And of course, in my case, since I really didn't want to be working in the studio full time, I hired people who had a sales background, so they had already accomplished, already knew some of those techniques and skills. They just needed to make sure they knew it in the appropriate way for the franchise that I invested in.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned hiring. I suspect that was one skill from your corporate executive background that was helpful in transforming you into a successful business owner, being able to identify what you need, go out and find it, and bring it in. What other skills, Mike, would you say, sales and marketing aside, of course, what other skills would you say were really helpful to you as you transitioned to franchise ownership?
Well, certainly, as you mentioned, interviewing, hiring people, being able to read people, to try to find the right skill sets. Also, just the ability to manage and guide folks, and encourage them, and make sure that we're staying on path. The operations of and execution of things. And the build out of the studios, that's kind of within my skill set. So the interfacing with the contractors to build the studio based upon plans that were provided to some degree. What the finished product should look like from corporate. Working with them was within my wheelhouse and area of expertise.
Excellent. I want to take a moment here to ask Pete a different kind of question because I've been chatting this question for a few minutes now. Pete says he sounds really smart, sounds really helpful. Can you tell us exactly what Pete does, how he actually works with corporate executives like Mike, and what's his engagement model? I think it's appropriate to take that moment now before we lean into the rest of our conversation. So Pete, have at it, please.
Absolutely. So, Tony, I am also a corporate escapee. I worked for large corporations for 20 years, right? And I used corporate escapee and really became an entrepreneur about 10 years ago, where I got engaged doing franchise consulting. As a franchise consultant, I'm just like a matchmaker. So I work with successful executives throughout the United States with this idea. My job is to get to know them, to get a good understanding that, hey, if they were like Mike, what characteristics do you want with the business? What do you want to accomplish with the business? So I have them fill out a questionnaire and I do a full consultation. I talk to them for 90 minutes. Somebody gives me 90 minutes of their time. I can succinctly recap back to them what they're looking for in terms of a business. And I'll go research franchises. And with over 3,800 franchise companies out there, my job is to get them in front of good, solid, proven franchises. So I do some research over about a week's time. I'll come back to them. I'll present them 3 franchises that match what they're looking for, good, solid ones. And then I become a coach and I do weekly coaching calls. And my job is to bring them along in the journey, continuing to educate them, make sure that they're prepared for each step of the way, to give them resources, to make sure the franchise companies take good care of them. And the cool thing about what I do is I take people through this journey of exploring franchises. Is my process, it doesn't cost anybody anything. They don't sign anything, they don't pay anything. And the way in which I'm compensated, it's really cool. It's number one is if they do end up investing in a franchise, I get a referral fee from the franchisor.
Okay.
So very similar to like how realtors paid. And then second, when I do a great job, I hope that people refer me and say, you got to talk to Pete. He's a crazy bald franchise guy. So the idea behind it is I'm kind of somebody that brings along the people on a journey and helps them all the way through the process.
Got it. Well, that's really helpful to know. So, Mike, let's march forward to, I'll say, present day, okay? But before we quite get there, give us a sense, please, of the timeline from the time, say, you signed the dotted line, as it were, to the point where you were in role as an entrepreneur. What was that in a period of months, would you say?
It was about 7 months, Tony.
Okay.
I signed the paperwork, and then you've got to go through the efforts to formulate your company because you can't do a whole lot until that company is formed. And then you've got to search out for the location, and then negotiate the lease, and then build out the space.
Hmm.
And in the middle of doing all that, you're also you're beginning trying to interview and hire and make sure that all that comes together so that as the space is built out and the keys are handed over to you, you got people coming in, you got equipment coming in, and within a matter of days, you're open to the public. So we're just a little over 7 months initially, and I would say about 2 months of that is the initial formation and getting the ball rolling, and about 4 months is the build out and open up time frame along with the lease negotiations.
It seems like a pretty fast track in hindsight, I'm sure. Um, Now,
Yes.
success, of course, means different things to different people. For many of us, it's a feeling. For others, it has everything to do with P&L. Um, can you give us a sense of when you personally felt that you were successful, whatever that means to you?
So I would say I recently had that aha that we finally have turned the corner within the last few months, and I'll break it down a little bit
Hmm.
for you. So I've always felt good about the model. I always felt good that this was a good solution from all the investigation that I did and all the review I did of the franchise disclosure documents and talking with other owners and playing this out. I also anticipated out of the 3 studios, I would have 2 that would perform pretty well and another one that would not perform as well. In my particular case, the not performing as well was the first studio. That didn't scare me off. I knew that was an anomaly based upon continuing to talk and investigate with other owners, and and, uh, um, and then as I built my second studio out. Now, keep in mind, the first studio was cash flow positive within a matter of about 3 months.
Wow.
Um, it just stagnated at that point, which to me says we're not, we've got to figure out why.
Hmm.
I then opened up the second studio we went cash flow positive probably within 30 days, and continuing to grow from there to the point that I'm drawing a salary, and we're still growing. I'm still putting cash aside to build out the third studio. So when I was able to start drawing a salary and not negatively impact the income of the franchise, then to me that was success. We've accomplished something, but I really know that really success is still a number of months down the road, because I've got another studio to get opened up. I want to continue to see this growing to the point there's still growth to happen, and there's still room to grow. But overall, the business is cash flow positive, and it's doing some good things.
It's funny. I've talked to you before, but now we're having our actual conversation, and I can hear it in your voice. I'm sure our listeners can as well. It's a voice of enthusiasm and passion and commitment and determination, and it's a great thing to hear. I don't hear a lot of it sometimes in corporate life, so thanks for for lifting my spirits today. So let me take some questions from people who are, again, are fascinated by the fact that you are in this model where you're still a corporate executive, and yet you're running what is soon going to be 3 studios. Help us understand first, in units of time, how do you unpack your day? I mean, how many of your hours go to, being physically present or otherwise working the franchise business, and how do you balance that daily with corporate existence?
So you mentioned physically present. That's there's certainly a big question mark whether it's in the studio or in the corporate office. The corporate office is at home, so I'm in the corporate office every day. But that could be reading 5 emails, or it could be cranking out some reports and double checking some stuff. My visitations to the studios, there's one that's 10 minutes from the house. Unfortunately for them, they get to see me much more frequently, probably 1 to 2, 3 times a week, as I just drop in. In the other location, it's over an hour away. I get out there every few months, but I do talk with the general managers multiple times through the week, so we always have the connection open. They know to call me any day, anytime if they need to. I spend approximately 20 hours a week at this moment. I spend a lot more time as I'm going through the lease process, the build out, and then the first few months of getting a studio open, and basically developing that relationship with that general manager to make sure that we're thinking along the same lines. So they know and have that level of comfort that if they get a unique situation, they know what decision to make that's going to be good for them and for me. My goal is to reduce my involvement to about 10 hours. I use a CPA to do most of my accounting, and have recently taken that off my plate. And I'm just in the process of, as I learned different things and got them set up, to offload those components. Because at the end of the day, all I really need to do is read a few reports and coach the leaders of the organization like I've done in corporate life.
Right.
And if we can do that, then the business will be successful. And that's where I'm striving to try to get down to 8 to 10 hours a week.
Okay. Mike, thinking about the rigorous demands of certainly franchise ownership, but also balancing that with what is a real corporate job, what have you found to be the greatest point of struggle for you? What do you look at daily or now and then and say, man, I wish that were easier?
Good question, Tony. I think at the end of the day, it certainly would be nice to have a teleporter machine where you could step in a closet and push a button and get to another location real quick, so you could deal with it and get back. But that's we don't have those today.
That would be
I
quite
think
a
the biggest
franchise,
challenge.
though.
That would be. I need to find the right engineers to help me with that, and maybe we got something. But I think the biggest challenge from a franchise perspective in running the absentee approach is hiring the right person. to run that, and making sure that they've got the skills, they're invested, and and then of course you reward them appropriately. That's the biggest challenge because you're not there. Again, that's part of why I did multiple locations, so that if I didn't have the right one, I had options available to me instead of myself being that option.
Got
Um,
it.
that's the biggest challenge that I've got, I believe.
No, that's definitely real. This question is for Pete. Certainly, it's not for me because I sure can't answer this. Pete, the question I'm getting has everything to do with how you set up an organization in terms of legal and tax consequences. Are we looking at S corps, LLCs? Help me out. I'm on the ropes here, Pete.
Yeah, so pretty common LLCs, S Corp are the two main ones. If you're using the ROPS program, you're using, for lack of better terms, your retirement dollars, that must go through a C Corp. So those are the three core ones. But again, if you're using retirement dollars, it's not hard today to set up a corporation. You can literally do it through LegalZoom, or you can hire an attorney to set it up. So setting up a corporate entity is not difficult at all in today's world.
Okay. All right. Now, sticking with Pete, because this is another one of those questions. This has to do with the SBA loans. Let's say I've got a 10-year SBA loan. What are some options for paying it back? If you could, I know these are broad strokes, general terms, but if you could help us understand the options, Pete, and what some of the drawbacks might be in doing it all at once, aggressively, or over time. What's your take on that one?
Well, I think number one is that you can pay back an SBA loan early, so there's no kind of pre-penalty associated with it. There's cost to set it up and stuff like that, but the idea is that you can pay it off early. I think the biggest thing that I would look at with doing an SBA and the way in which I pay it off is protecting my cash. So as long as I've got enough cash to pay it off and still have cash in my business, because we want to have cash, we want to have those resources. We just never know. That's the lifeblood of your business, and so before you pay it off, you can do it advanced or pay it a little faster, but I would always be careful to make sure that you have enough resources before you pay that off so that you're in a safe position.
Okay. Now, I'm sure everyone just got a taste of what we're saying you can get from Pete. I'm going to cut to a promotion here. Everyone forgive me, but it's that important because you just heard him answer a question I certainly couldn't answer. I'm sure many of us have on our minds who are thinking about franchise ownership and simply can't answer on our own. And earlier, Pete described what he will do for our ExecuNet audience, and thank you for that, Pete. So please follow through on that link after our discussion today. If you're curious about franchise ownership, if you've got individual questions that have come up, or you've thought about them after our session, follow through, find out what the future might hold for you. It's definitely worth that short conversation. So, Mike, back to you. When you think about your end game and what the future holds, is it more boutiques? Is it making additional purchases, other shifts that you can foresee right now? What's your sense about that today, Mike?
My sense today is I probably will stop at three.
Okay.
I have entertained the thought, and my wife would probably kill me if I did this, of going to 4 or 5, just because of the time it takes to do that. But I feel confident that with the three, that gives me lots of options to, one, repay back my retirement money, build a basically an investment, something that I can choose to do what I want to in the future, whether I want to sell it, whether I want to figure out how to transfer it to one of my children, and still allow me to weather the storm, or do a soft retire where I get turn off the 60-hour-a-week world plus and go to a 20-hour-a-week work week, and vacations multiple times of the year, as as you could in a semi-retired. So I have options to do that, and I just as I'm still in the build-out phase, while I'm thinking about those, I haven't made any decisions yet. But that's probably 12 to 18 months down the road to make the what is my my exit strategy.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds, again, listening to you, that you're someone who has already assessed the the economics, the feasibility of doing this. And the question I'm getting from some of our listeners now is thinking about this as a substitute, full time, full throttle substitute for corporate America. Is that something that you'd say people need to seriously consider? And I think it's a question for both Pete and Mike as our audience weighs the pros and cons and understands Mike's journey. They're thinking about, one of these options. Maybe it's semi-absenteeism, maybe it's full ownership and commitment. Um, how do we pull this off, Pete, and maybe leave corporate life behind forever? What's your sense about that?
Yeah, so it really kind of comes down to what you're comfortable with. Like when I left the corporate world, I left my high-paying corporate job. I couldn't take it anymore, and I went straight into owning a franchise. I didn't do the executive model semi-absentee where I kept my corporate job and started on the side. For some people, that's an option that just makes it they're a little bit more comfortable. But duly note that, Mike mentioned he invested in the franchise before he got his next corporate job. But the idea is if you invest in an executive model semi-absentee where you don't have to be there all the time, like Mike mentioned, being there 20 hours, you can start that business, and then if a corporate job comes up, you can take it. So you have all kinds of different flexibility, but it's people do it all the time where they just leave the corporate world and they invest in a franchise. And what I did is I had to basically supplement my living expenses for a period of time till I got the business up to where it kind of covered my total expense or basically funded my lifestyle. So there's different trade-offs for both, but it is about taking control of your life and putting it on your terms so that nobody can ever walk in and take something away from you. They can't take away your income. They can't take away your job. It's yours to control,
Mhm.
unless you choose to fire yourself. So,
Right, of
right.
course. And it's funny, as you were speaking, Pete, I recall a conversation I had recently with another executive member who now can look back and say, I'm so, so glad I did this. But meaning left corporate life initially, had that model of semi-absenteeism, but then made the full switch. But he jokes about it and says, there was a moment, and it just makes me smile to say this. Says there was a moment where I went window shopping at restaurants. Give an extreme example where he said, I needed to think through it and really hunker down, but I was so committed to getting it done that I managed through it and it was fine. And look at me now. So I just think it's one of those commitment stories that is worth sharing. So, Mike, what's your sense about this? I didn't hear you say leave corporate life for good, or did I? What's your, again, looking at your end game? Is that a possibility for you?
I think from my personal perspective, I will leave corporate America when the numbers make sense and I'm retiring from corporate America. Um, and so I'm done when I'm ready to walk behind, push that back, and go to a part-time type of a working commitment. Uh, I have seen a number of people, other owners within the same concept that have just a few studios, to some that are have five, six, a dozen locations, and that is their primary that is their job. That's all they do.
Hmm.
And of course, they're organized, maybe with another layer, like another manager that helps them. Um, so there's many ways to go about it. I think all options are available. It really depends upon your personal investigation on the financial benefits of what that franchise can do for you and what it is you as an individual want to see out of that.
Hmm. Well said. And I'm certainly getting questions that are very particular. And I'm so glad to see that our listeners are thinking through this on close terms that are very personal to them, involving not just loans and risk, but the amount of investment required and so on. I'm going to encourage everyone who has that question or think they might have that question to follow that link, talk to Pete directly. A lot of this stuff is, as you've already figured out, very personal to you, what you want to accomplish, where you want to go next, how soon you want to get there, and how best to get there. That's where Pete comes in. So you can follow that link. So I won't take those questions now because I'm perceiving they're very individualized and he's the right person to talk to one-on-one about them. So Pete, let's dial back entirely for a moment. And if you're someone who's listened today, maybe caught one of your master classes before, and you want to dip your toe in the water, do you recommend going to websites? Do you recommend researching by driving around and looking at what's available in your town? How do you start that process of pinpointing what's right for you and then assessing whether it's feasible to move forward?
Yeah, so there's a lot of franchises out there. There's actually over 3,800 franchise concepts. And bottom line is there's some good ones and a whole bunch of not good ones. And there's really three ways in which you can look for a franchise. You can go to many of these sites where you can click on boxes and get information on 10 different franchise concepts. The problem is that a lot of times your information is sold. Your phone number is sold to franchisors, to franchise consultants. And so by the time you're done, you're overwhelmed with people soliciting to you. So maybe a better way, or the second way, is if you see a franchise concept you like, go directly to their website. They should have a link that says franchising, and you can create a dialogue. You are going directly into their sales funnel, so that's a little bit hard because nobody's there to help you. The third way is using a franchise consultant like myself, where somebody helps you figure out what you're looking for, what you want to accomplish with the business, and then introduces you to those companies, and they're by your side, educating you, helping you through the process. And the cool thing is the service is free, so it's crazy not to leverage a free service as you look to explore to see if franchising is the right path for you. And it's not for everybody, but you certainly want to give yourself every chance possible to go through this with somebody that's right there by your side, teaching you, educating you, coaching you through it.
Yes, makes a whole lot of sense. So we're going to start to wrap this up a little early, unless there are any questions, in which case just fire them at me, guys, and I'll squeeze them in before we say our final goodbyes. But let me start to wrap it up. Mike, thank you so much for making time for us. I'm sharing your experience and your insight, the wisdom you've gained along the way. It's truly appreciated. Thank you all for tuning in. There were hundreds today. I thank you for it, and your attention certainly is my most precious resource. I didn't get to everyone's question for the reason that I said. Some are really personal, highly individualized, and that's why connecting directly with Pete is the next best thing I can do for you today. And thank you, Pete, as always, for making time and walking us through it. It's definitely an exciting space to be talking about, and at the same time understanding how to actually do it for ourselves. And I've learned a lot just listening to you today. So with that, any final thoughts from Mike or Pete as we officially wrap up today's masterclass session / conversation?
Mike, you
Pete,
want to
you
go first?
first. Oh,
Oh, I'll go
Mike,
first.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to pass on to folks, and it just occurred to me, and what I didn't share earlier is I had probably 5 years before I had that aha moment and started to talk to Pete. I had talked to another individual related to a concept, and it was frankly it was selling smoothies, and I just could never see myself doing that. But searching for a consultant is much like searching for a real estate broker, somebody to sell your house or to buy a new house. It's all about the relationship and whether you've got a connection or not. And before I made a decision to fully go with Pete, I talked with a number of other folks, and I can tell you, with everybody that I talked to, they said he's one of the good ones. There's a lot of consultants out there but there's only a few very good ones. So if you're going to entertain talking with a consultant, by all means, give Pete a shot. I think he'll do you a fantastic job. He's done great for me. And you got to find good advisors when you're talking through something like this. It's very significant in your life, and I've been very happy with the relationship and the service and support that Pete's given me. And I think he would be too if you gave him an opportunity.
Wow, Mike, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having had the opportunity to work with you, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. And I would encourage anybody that is in a point where maybe they're in career transition or they're just trying to set up their future, control their destiny, create that career and income stability to have a conversation, because it doesn't cost you anything. There's no risk associated with learning, and you can explore all your different paths, but franchising can be a great path for many people.
Well said. Well, thank you again, Pete. Thank you again, Mike, very much. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next session of ExecuNet Masterclass. Bye for now.